Greetings from the Philippines. The Philippines was devastated by a recent typhoon, but I think Filipinos learned to be resilient, to swim on the flooded streets, and also to make the furnitures elevated from the floor so that when the floodwaters will come, they will not be soaked. And instead of furnishing the homes of those low land places in the metros with foams and couch, better to have made of what? Made of wood, so that when the storm comes, still fine. It can be reused. Despite of that, we know that storms and tragedies are not just came, but coming and will come into the future. Because all of these are what? Are reminders so that we can look for a place that will be free from all these calamities and maladies. Brother Alex and I were talking while we were uh, going here. He was asking about COVID-19. I was COVID-19 here. I think most of you were here during the lockdown period. We were also locked down. We were at Ayas during that period. And we experienced lockdown too. And one thing that I learned from COVID-19 is the possibility that the world can be one, can be united into one. It happened for the sake of human survival, not due to worship, due to health reason. All political reasons were what? Put down. We want to survive. And in just few months, right? Lockdowns and other things. And human beings started what? Started to give in some of our freedom just to survive. In the Philippine Constitution, we have some freedoms there, freedom of mobility and others. But when survival is the issue, we need to give in some of these things. And I believe that it also happened here in Thailand. It reminds us about the things that we studied last quarter in our lesson in Sabbath School Quarterly about, what's the topic again? It's just a few days ago, great controversy, right? And then we're looking forward. One day, the world will be one again, but not one in worship against God's people. And as we study this morning, I believe and I pray that our study will help us as we continue to mature in faith. Today is the age of AI. The good thing, the good thing in terms of education that COVID-19 had brought to the world is technology, AI, artificial intelligence. Well, we've been using that. We've been using Grammarly in writing and etc. before, but because of this, now we have Chat GPT. In the College of Theology, we're trying to figure out on what to do because we don't like also our students to be copy pasting, but at least their mind should still be working critically. And yet we cannot outdo this AI writing apps. We need to embrace and make some policies so that we can use them, but at the same time the mind should still be working. I don't know in this school. I believe that is also your challenge. Today, when you want to go somewhere, Google it. If you want to know something, Google it. Are you also using Google here? Maybe you have a different search engine. Google it. Before, when you want to know something, you ask a friend. You want to go somewhere, you ask your neighbor, and then your neighbor or your friend will go, oh, you go there, and then turn right using the arms, and sometimes using the mouth, going there and then there, etc. But now you just, when I arrived at the train station yesterday, I went down, and then there was a stall selling some barbecues, and I printed a map, but I was nagtitipid, so I did not subscribe to the globe roaming. I had an internet at the airport. I put the hotel there, but later on I lost because I have no more internet connection in the railway. So when I went down, I printed them up. I showed them, and then a young man got his phone and Google it. That's the answer. But we only know from Google the what. But to how to look at things is quite difficult to be seen from AI. This morning, I would like to lead you into a study of a person in the Old Testament. His name is Joseph. Joseph. During the Sabbath school, the one who offered the song number was talking about Joseph. The song was a message about Joseph. Let's open our Bibles to Genesis chapter 37. Here is the story of this boy. We will not be reading the whole passages because our study is not only on the young Joseph, we'll be ending on the old Joseph, that is chapter 50. And 37 to 50 are what? How many chapters? It's more than 10 chapters. And that would be the passage, the chapters that we're going to study this morning. The good story of Joseph began with a robe made by his father. Better robe as compared to the ones he made to the brothers of Joseph, even to the youngest sibling of Joseph, as far as his mother is concerned. Mother Rachel. Is that Rachel? Yes. Benjamin. We do not read in the Bible that Father Jacob made a robe like what he made to Joseph that was given to Benjamin. But one that he made for Joseph was a lot better than to his brothers. And his brothers started to envy him. More than that, Joseph was a dreamer. We read 2 dreams recorded in the book of Genesis of Joseph. In the field, in one night, heavenly bodies. What happened to the sheaves? Joseph's sheaf stood upward while the sheaves of his brothers bowed down. And like one of us, right, and we have a good dreams, we like to tell that during the table talk, a meal talk with the family. And Joseph did. Came another dream about heavenly bodies encircling the one that represented Joseph in that dream. And his brothers started to hate Joseph, not only on the robe, but because of his dreams. And his father also commented when we read the passage, Jacob said, "Are you telling Joseph that even me and your mother will bow down to you?" The dreams were understood to be what? Divine message. Dreams during those period, in ancient period, are considered as manifestations of the gods and goddesses. To the heathen and also to the people of God, to the Hebrew people, dreams were very important because it is one way for God to manifest his desire in the future. So these dreams are understood to be saying that one day Joseph will head the family. So that the result was his brothers could not accept that and say, okay, could not accept that, we hate Joseph. One day, his father asked Joseph to go to bring meals to his brothers. We are now in verses 18 onward. And in verse 18, when his brothers saw Joseph, they were happy for the meal, but not for the person who was bringing the food. Have you ever experienced that? When somebody is giving to you, is giving you something that you're happy for the gift, but not to the person giving gift. This was the case with the siblings of Joseph. They wanted the food from home, but not the boy from home. And so they started to make some plans against this boy brother of theirs. Some would say, let us kill him. Some would say, no, let us spare his life. But you will read that these plans of his brothers were intended to reverse the dream. Because literally, you will read that from the Bible. Let's do this and let's see what will happen to his dreams. The story of Joseph is full of dreams and robes, right? Dreams, later on, we're going to look at the dreams of those prisoners and the dreams of the Pharaoh. And the robe, what will happen to the robe of Joseph? Soaked by blood as an alibi that Joseph was what? Was devoured by wild animals as an evidence that the son of Jacob, his favorite son, was gone. That is what happened to the robe that his father made for him. Joseph was thrown to the pit. And when the Midianites, these were merchants traveling from their country down to Egypt, were about to pass where they were, one of the siblings thought it best that, wow, we want to eradicate Joseph, and yet some of us don't like to kill him, we better sell him. And so Joseph was sold. To the Midianites. So what will happen to his dreams? Perhaps by this time, Joseph was not conscious of his dreams. He was conscious of his father in his home. He wanted to go home, but he could not do it. Now he was a slave. When you read Ellen G. White in her book, Patriarchs and Prophets, she writes, with a trembling heart, you look forward to the future. Trembling heart. Have you ever experienced to look into the future with full of anxiety, no hope? You are trembling because it appears that the future is against us already. That was the experience of Joseph with trembling heart. But I like this quotation from Ellen G. White. Ellen G. White says, but in the providence of God, even in this experience, was to be a blessing to him. He had learned in a few hours that which years might otherwise have taught him. Imagine being with people speaking different language, going away from home. That was the experience of Joseph. That's why Ellen G. White, he was experiencing a trembling heart, quote unquote. But Ellen White added, but it was God guiding him. That in few hours, he will learn something that if not in that situation, he would have learned that in years. Wow, what is that lesson that Joseph learned in few hours? When we read the story of Joseph, there are two views. One from a human point of view and one from God's point of view. And I'll be going back and forth to the human point of view and God's point of view. God's point of view is manifested here in the letter for letter, by letters when you read this story. But I would like to turn the other side to look at some human point of view. What is not said in the Bible, that I am happy that Ellen G. White said it, is the experience of Joseph when he was with the Midianites. The Bible is silent about that, but Ellen G. White says Joseph was trembling. He was crying. He was so upset with the situation. He was not laughing to have a tour in Egypt. He was not going there to tour. He was going there. And it appears to be that his future is dark. But in God's point of view, there's a lesson that he wanted to learn there. And what is that lesson? It's not stated in the Bible, but we read. I have two sources. I want you, brethren, that later on you get a copy of the Patriarchs and Prophets and reread. Probably you read sometime, read it again, that story. He was told by his father when he was younger. At this time, he was 17. When he was younger, stories about his grandparents, Abraham and Jacob. Like what did our parents do to us? Right? If we grew from Christian home, maybe non-Adventist, but a Christian home, or in our Adventist home, our fathers have told us stories. Bedtime stories. Sometimes Arthur Maxwell's stories, the Bible stories. Or sometimes stories of the faith of their forefathers. And that is what we did and what we are doing to our children. Am I right, parents? We'll tell them stories. And stories and stories. Many times. Remember when our children were still young? We'll tell them and tell them and tell them the same story. And when we try to reword the stories, our children will say, no, that's not the story. Because they memorize even the words and they know it, but still they want to hear them. That was also the experience of Joseph. But during those years, he was hearing the God of Abraham, the God of Jacob, the God of Isaac, the God of his forefathers. Not his God. Down to Egypt with the Midianites, he started to remember, to reminisce those stories. And he started to think and reflect that, hey, if my grandparent Isaac was led by God when he left home to save his life from the threat of his brother Esau, and he met him along the way and Luz, that was renamed Bethel later on, and he had a dream that the Lord will be with him. Is it possible that the Lord will be with me down to Egypt, to a strange land? And Ellen G. White says that in that few hours down to Egypt, he learned to make God his God, not anymore the God of his parents. When did you learn that? To make the God of your parents your God. Probably as you remember, as you turn the pages of your life's history, there is one page there where you made the God of your parents your God. I am a parent. I'm a father of young children. And sometimes I said, it appears to be that the children are going to different direction, different from what parents wanted them to go. We want them to go here, but they are going to a different direction. What will parents do? Just pray that one day these children of ours will make our God their God. That one day they will experience something in their lives, a turning about experience that they will learn to entrust. Because I believe that the Holy Spirit is working. I don't know your families, my dear brethren, those people who are listening to this study. I don't know our experiences, but I believe that among our children might be going a different way, different from the lessons that we taught them in their childhood. And as parents, the only thing that we can do is to pray. Let us continue to pray for them that one day they will meet God in their experiences that will ignite them and make a decision like what happened to this young Joseph, to make the God of his forefathers to be his God. Down to Egypt, he was sold to Potiphar's house as a slave. Potiphar had no one or two or three or 10 slaves. He had hundreds of slaves. Being a wealthy person and influential person, the Bible says that he was a captain of the guard. They were not worshippers of Jehovah or Yahweh, worshippers of the gods and goddesses of Egypt. Gods and goddesses, plural. And everything that they do, there was a corresponding god or goddess that needed to be prayed to bless that activity. For the farmers, they have their patron gods and goddesses. To the fishermen at Nile, they have their patron gods and goddesses. Remember what happened during the time of Moses? That about the 10 plagues, that each plague were meant to attack the gods and goddesses of the Egyptians. To show to the people that these gods and goddesses are futile. These were the gods and goddesses that were worshipped in the home of Potiphar when Joseph was sold to him. And the way for promotion is to go with what is practiced. Follow the tradition. That's the way to be promoted. But what happened to Joseph was different. Joseph did not follow the practice of his fellow slaves, bowing down to the gods and goddesses of the Egyptians. He remained to be loyal to his God. He did not make his own altar with another image because God has no image. God cannot be described by any earthly thing. And yet he worshipped the way his forefathers worshipped. And surely, in the human point of view, it's not a promise. It's not a promising act for promotion because he was going to a different direction, unlike the practice of his boss, Potiphar. But what do we read? What do we read from the Bible? We read from the Bible that the Lord was with Joseph and he lived in the house. That's the first verse where we have that information that the Lord was with Joseph. We did not read that the Lord was with Joseph when he was traveling down to Egypt. It was God appears to be silent. Right? But was God silent? He was not. He was actively being with this man. And when he was in Egypt, there's that phrase from the Bible, the Lord was with Joseph and he lived in the house. What is that? What is the meaning of he lived in the house? Why? Was he not living in the house? He was living in a slave's bunk house before that. A slave's bunk house. But later on, Ellen G. White said that he worked there for about 10 years. He lived in the house of Potiphar when he became the second in command. I told you a while ago that Joseph was going to a different direction as far as the religious practices of the house of Potiphar. Humanly speaking, no promotion at all. But what happened to Joseph? If he arrived there and he was the 100th, he started to be 99th, 98th, etc., then 58th. Then he became the first among the slaves. He became in charge. And the Bible says that Potiphar made him in charge of everything. He did not need to see the Excel file about how much are gained this year, how much sacks of rice are gained this year, or the produce, how much sheep were born, or goats. No, he entrusts everything to Joseph because Joseph was a trusted slave. The only thing that Potiphar was bothered is about the food that he ate. Brethren, we have different experiences here in Thailand. During the discussion a while ago, during the Sabbath school time, there's about faithfulness, Sabbath keeping. And some young ladies are not having their work yet because of Sabbath concern. Be faithful to the Lord, brethren. Don't hide your faith. The Lord will direct you. We could not see the future, but when we look at the past through the lenses of faith, we will realize later on that the Lord is guiding our lives. Did ever Joseph hear the word, the Lord was with Joseph? No. It was the word of the writer of Genesis. It was the words of Moses, the one who wrote Genesis. He did not hear audibly that the Lord was with him, but he remained faithful to what he knew and compassionate. But what was the payment of being faithful to the Lord? Dungeon, right? We always say that, hey, be faithful. We always claim Malachi 3. Give a faithful tithe and offering, and no depository place on earth would be able to what? To accommodate all the blessings of God. But look at what happened to Joseph. He was faithful to the house of Potiphar, but due to that faithfulness of calling sin by its right name, saying no to the temptation of Mrs. Potiphar, that finally he landed not in a jail but in a dungeon. A dungeon that was so dark and filled with rodents, rats, cockroaches, filthy place. And mind you, when we look at that through the human side of the story, then Joseph, we will have all the reasons to complain to God and would say, God, I've been faithful to you. I've been faithful. How come that how come that dungeon is now the price of faithfulness? What do you think, brethren, about the experiences? Have you experienced being faithful to the Lord? If you have some lands in the Philippines, you invested with money and now you heard the news that it was now flooded. What happened to the rice? What happened to the corn? No more. And then you say, well, Lord, I've been faithful, returning tithes and giving generous offering. How come? Or, faithful, you pray before we travel, and then accident met along the way. The car is wrecked, and the mortgage is not yet paid. What we'll do, are we going to pay? And finally that year, we fail to what? To insure, to buy an insurance. We'll be paying a wrecked car. Is that the price of being faithful to the Lord? An investment that went bankrupt? When we read the Bible, brethren, we don't read that the moment that we are faithful to the Lord, everything good will come. From the story of Joseph and the rest of the stories in the Bible, tragedy are always experienced by God's people. But how we look at the tragedy is the issue here. Do we look at the tragedy that will come as a product of our faithfulness? As a punishment? As a price of being faithful? Or something that is beyond those complaints? Ellen G. White says that when that happened to Joseph, he had a terrible experience. He suffered for his integrity. That's the word of Ellen G. White. Joseph suffered for his integrity. We suffer for our faithfulness, brethren. That is 100% sure. We expect to suffer due to our faithfulness. If you expect that everything will be good, your faithfulness, I think you are not in the right relationship with God. Satan can promise that. But for God, look at the disciples, look at God's people. When you turn the pages of the Bible, they suffer, and suffering is a part of Christian life. Suffered for faithfulness. Ellen G. White says, at first, Joseph was treated with great severity by his jailers. Great severity. But Joseph's real character shine out in that tragic dungeon. In that dark dungeon, Joseph's faith and integrity shone in that dark place. He held fast his faith and patience. His years of faithful service had been most cruelly repaid. Look at the term from Ellen G. White. His years of faithful service had been most cruelly repaid, yet this did not render him morose of distrustful. He had peace that comes from conscious innocence and is trusted his case with God. Tragedies are God's blessings because tragedies will tell us where we are in our faith. Imagine you put a wooden pool. You dig a hole, you put that pool, and then you put soil and harden the soil around. Then how would you check that that wooden pool is strong? By seeing it? Maybe you use a level so that it would be very straight in its direction. Is that the way to inspect that wooden pole that is to be strong by have visual? You need to go around, right? And you need to touch and shake. That's the way to check if the pull is strong or weak. Shaking our faith, these tragedies will shake our faith so that we will know where we are. How did Joseph respond? He responded with patience and confidence that God is with him. Yes, psychologically, we will undergo some processes when we experience bad things to our lives. Anger. We are angry. But then we started to rethink and reflect. And at the end, in that process, there is what? Acceptance. And when we are in that acceptance, may it be that the Lord will find us faithful to Him. 2 dreams came. One for the one in charge for the food because they were jailed by the Pharaoh, the butler. And there's another dream by another person, another palace official. To make this story short, all the interpretations of Joseph came true. But there's one thing. There's a word of Joseph here. Remember? We don't hear Joseph speaking. The first thing that we heard from Joseph was his response to Mrs. Potiphar. In the dungeon, we hear Joseph speaking. What was the words recorded in the Bible? To the chief butler, Joseph said, when you will be, when your position will be what? Will be given back to you, do not forget me. But he was forgotten. Although, because we read that in the Bible that the Lord was with Joseph in the jail, but it was not a good life for him. Yes, the Lord was with him, and though he became the mayordomo, the boss, the steward of the jailer, yet life was difficult for him. He wanted to get out. That's why he asked the chief butler, do not forget me when your position will be returned to you. But then he was forgotten. He was remembered because of another dreams. The dream of Pharaoh. That was a time that he was remembered. Because no one among the Egyptian wise men could interpret the dream. It was only a person who was in jail. That's why chief butler said, oh, I remember one. I remember him, Joseph. He was the one who interpreted my dream and the dream of the chief baker. I was restored to my position, whereas my friend, the chief baker, was beheaded. And he went to the Pharaoh and told the Pharaoh, Pharaoh, I know somebody. Perhaps he can help you with your problem. And so Joseph was taken, was able to interpret the dream. But Joseph said, Pharaoh, this dream is a remarkable dream because the God of heaven is telling you what will happen. 7 years of plenty, but after that 7 years of plenty, there will be 7 years of famine. And the severity of that famine is so devastating that Egyptians or all Egypt will forget everything that took place during the 7 years of plenty. What happened to Joseph? He became the prime minister. He became in charge. And like what happened to Potiphar's house, the Pharaoh entrusted everything to him, had given him the seal of authority that took place. Fast forward to the time that he will meet his brothers. He had another concern, right? His relationship with his brothers. To make this story short, when you read the Bible, due to the famine of Egypt that affected Israel, his brothers went down to buy food. And finally, Joseph remembered them. They did not know that it was Joseph, the one in transacting, the one commanding all the affairs with regards to all the transactions about the food, etc. But Joseph knew them and remembered about the dreams. If I were Joseph, I would remember the cries that I had, asking my pleading to let go, and yet they threw me into the pit. I would remember the times of my cry and my pagmamakaawa, and yet they sold me to the Midianites. They were the cost of my misery. If I were Joseph, I will see to it that crime will pay. How about you? I don't know. Joseph was not like me. Thank God for that. Joseph was not like me. Vengeance has no room in the heart of Joseph. What he was doing was to test his brother. And when the revelation came, revealing that I am your brother Joseph. And you know what? What was the response of his brother? They were so terrified and so afraid. I'd like to turn your Bibles with me. Let's go to chapter 45 of Genesis. I want verse 4. Let's begin with verse 4. Oh, let's go to verse 3. Then Joseph said to his brothers, chapter 45, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? He was so excited to tell that he is Joseph and to ask if his father are still well. What was the response of his brothers? Sorry for the nagulat, yung anak ni Jordan. What was the response? But his brothers could not answer him. They were spellbound with fear, for they were dismayed at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, please come closer. And they came closer, not because they missed Joseph, but because of their fear. Have you ever experienced following a command out of fear? They came closer out of fear. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. I don't know why Joseph's phrase was like this. I am your brother whom you sold to Egypt. If I were one of his brothers, what would be the thing that will come out from my mind? Guilt and fear the more because Joseph remembered about the conspiracy of selling him. And now, verse 5, and now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. But God sent me before you to preserve life. You sold me, but God sent me. Have you ever equated an experience of yours? I was sold, but God sent me. I came here, but then I realized as I look back that God sent me here because I have a mission. I think, let us remember this as a lesson to my fellow Filipino brethren who are here, and the rest, my brethren who are here working here in Bangkok. Instead of choosing to work here in your own native land, in your own country, you are here. Probably started to come here due to find some financial reason. It's greener here than back home. But I want you to realize that though those were the initial reasons of coming here to Thailand, to Bangkok, to work here, but perhaps God sent you here because there's a mission that you need to do on behalf of the kingdom of God. I hope you started to realize that. When my wife ended his employment from the denomination, when there was a call, he applied that position some years back, and then suddenly, without thinking about the call from the government, from the Commission on Higher Education, I never thought that God is sending him, but based from her reflection, God is sending her for something, for a mission. Perhaps you also realize that, my brethren. When I was sent from another place, after IAS, my family thought that we are going to retire in that particular college. But something happened, and I was sent to another place to work in that place. And to be honest with you, I'm still trying to understand why I am there, not there. I do not know. But I hope that the Lord will one day manifest to me the reason why. I am already more than 1 year working at the Adventist University of the Philippines. After IAS, my seminary studies there, I was thinking the family was so converted that we will retire because I spent 4 years in my doctoral degree, and according to the SSD policy, 1 year of study, if you are under bursary, is equivalent to 3 years service return. So 4 times 3 is 12 years. I'm turning 50 plus 12, that will be 62, close to retirement. By 60, when I'm already in that year, I can now retire because I already about 35 years of service in the Adventist work. So we plan to retire in the college where Ben and I and Jordan graduated, our dear NLAC. But I don't know. Perhaps that's also your case. You planned, then something came. But for Joseph, he started to understand, you sold me, but God sent me. Now let's go to chapter 50, verse 20, the verse that was read. by Brother Alex. What was the context? Well, the family went down to Egypt and they were given Goshen as a place for the Hebrew people because the Egyptian hated the shepherds. Remember, the Hebrews were shepherds. Okay? That's why they were quarantined in a place called Goshen, where they found plenty of grasses to feed their livestock. But time came that Jacob died. Yes, Jacob died. And the brothers started to remember that Joseph was good to them because of their father. Now that their father is gone, what will happen to them? Remember, Joseph was the prime minister. Remember, Joseph became a slave because of the siblings. Remember, during their first encounter, when Joseph revealed who he was, Joseph remembered that he was sold, although he said that he was sent by God. That fear started to grieve his brothers. So they talked and then they went to Joseph. That's the context of verse 20 of chapter 50 of Genesis. Let's go to that. Look at verse 17. Thus you shall say to Joseph, please forgive. They started to what? They wrote a script and they started to memorize that script. So that when they will appear in front of Joseph, it will be a chorus, a unison chorus, that everybody will be saying the same word. I don't know if they hired a conductor. And what was dialogue that they memorized? Please forgive, I beg you, the transgression. So forth and so on. Verse 18, his brothers came and fell down before him. And then they started to say their memorized dialogue in unison. They did not go there to serenade Joseph. They went there to plea to Joseph. What was the response of Joseph? Verse 19, and Joseph said to them, do not be afraid. For am I in God's place? Then verse 20 comes. As for you, you meant evil against me. How did he say that? Did he say that in harsh words? It appears to be a terrible statement, right? As for you, you meant evil against me. I think it was in a low tone, a voice. Out of love. As for you, you meant evil against me. But God meant it for good in order to bring about his present result to preserve many people alive. That ends. Relationship that was broken because of the doing of his father's favoritism, it is mended. Relationship restored. We went to a place in the northern part of Luzon, in the Ilocos Norte, for a Voice of Youth. And to conduct a Voice of Youth evangelism. Unfortunately, there were two families who did not like to talk with each other. They built grudges. They built walls in between. I was still a student, And then the pastor who was with us, Pastor Rick Biscaro, was our sponsor in the Voice of Youth. And the leader and the preacher of that evangelism made a plan to appease, to reconcile these brethren. And I do not forget the words that was uttered. I was there. I was not the speaker. I was, I think, the Voice of Prophecy coordinator. And the pastor asked these two brethren, in heaven, all of us will be neighbors. All of us will be neighbors in heaven. What will happen if you not like to talk? What will happen if you not like to be reconciled with each other? I don't know your experiences, brethren. Maybe there are people that whenever you smell their scent, your hair started to stand. You have some ghost bump because you hate them. You don't like. Because one day, umutang at ikaw naman nagpautang, and now, nabayaran, siya nang galit. Is now what? Angry at you. You read a lot of posts like that on social media. Or you did good and he did bad, he did evil. And human side, we reacted negatively. Yes, you performed some foot washing, but there is still the what? The grudge. What are you going to do with those grudges? Well, Joseph did not forget. It's not forgive and forget. He forgave, but he did not forget. You notice this one? He remembered, right? He remembered. But yes, he remembered, but it was not anymore against his brothers. He remembered that. And how did he see it? How did he remember it? That God meant it for good for the family. How do we look at bad memories in our lives? Bad experiences? When we look back. Yes, we were so angry when we were there. We could not read the future. But now that we have a better perspective and now we look back, how do we read them? How do we look at them? Now we see. Now remember in the eyes of faith and through the perspective of faith, and you say, oh God, I was angry then, but now I remember. It was for the good of me, so that I can entrust and be not to forget, but to be forgiving, so that the Holy Spirit can transform my lives. That was Joseph. And if we have similar experiences, brethren, and if we are willing, God can transform our lives to be like Joseph also. May the Lord bless His word.